So in this module so far, we've introduced the fact that there's two types of acquisition reporting within GA4. The first one we spent the last video looking at, which was traffic acquisition. And in a nutshell, what that is doing is looking at the channels that drove the sessions and the success of those sessions. Now in this video, we're going to look at the other type of acquisition, which is user acquisition. And that type of acquisition is looking now at the users, what acquired those users, and the success of those users. The concept of a user is ubiquitous throughout Google Analytics. So I've done a whole deep dive video on explaining what it actually is and how we can change the definition in some cases. So check the link in the descriptions if you want to learn a bit more around what a user is and how we can change that. So now this gives us two different ways of looking at the same data in Google Analytics. Let's look at an example to put this into practice. Now let's assume we've acquired a user, and what that means is the user visited the website for the very first time via an organic social post. Let's say that was in May. And a couple of weeks later, that same user did a Google search and they clicked on one of our paid ad links to revisit the website. And on that session, let's assume they converted or they did something of note. Now, when we look at our traffic acquisition reports, we can say that paid search acquired that session and that session was successful. A conversion occurred. But another way of looking at it is looking at the success of the user. And this is what user acquisition gives us. Now, if we look at our user acquisition reports, it will show us that the user was acquired via organic social. That user then generated a session and has converted. So when we're looking at the data on that one day, we've got two very different ways of looking at the same data. So now let's jump into Google Analytics and have a look at the user acquisition report and see what's different there. When we go into this report, the first thing you'll notice is that it looks pretty familiar, or at least it looks very similar to all the other detailed reports in terms of the functionality. And scrolling down to the data table, it looks really similar in terms of the traffic acquisition, because I'm looking at my primary dimension and it looks like the default channel group. The only difference now is that it's called first user default channel group. And if I have a look at the drop-down menu to have a look at what the other primary dimensions are that I can use, I've got access to all the familiar parameters like source, medium, campaign, and default channel group. All of those UTM parameters that get put in, I can get out here. And now the difference is that they're prefixed with first user. And this is what separates the first user or the user acquisition dimensions to the session dimensions, which is the traffic acquisition. So for example, if I add a secondary dimension and look at my different traffic source dimensions, you can see that both lists are available. I've got my first user dimensions and my session dimensions. In this report, I'm going to focus on one of them. I'm going to focus on the user acquisition dimensions, so all the ones that prefix with first user. Looking at some of the metrics available in this report by default, we can see the first one is called new users. Now, new users is new users that were acquired via this marketing channel within the date range selected. So rather than looking at total users in this period of time, we're looking at how many new users were acquired. We've got some traffic dimensions as well. We're looking at engaged sessions and metrics similar to that. And this is looking at total traffic again during this period of time that were acquired via these marketing channels. But the thing to remember here, or the thing to bear in mind, is that they may have been acquired before this date range. And moving on, we can also see things like average engagement time. And this average engagement time metric is really valuable because it's nothing to do with sessions. It's looking at the total average engagement time for each user. So we can see here, regardless of how many times they've come back to the website and via what channel, we can see users that are acquired via, for example, organic social, are far more likely to spend more time visiting the website than every other channel. And on the right-hand side, we've got our three familiar columns. We've got events, conversions, and revenue. And this is a really great way to include any data point, any event that we're tracking into our report again. So for example, if I select purchase from the events drop-down here, I can now look at all the purchases, and then the revenue column will give me the revenue for all of the conversions that occurred during this period of time, but now we're attributing it back to the acquisition channel for that user. I can do that for any event, so it doesn't have to just be purchases, any event that we're tracking, and I can now attribute back to that first acquisition channel. Putting it in a slightly different way, we can talk about the traffic acquisition reports as being the last marketing click from a user and the success of that. And the user acquisition is talking about the first marketing click from the user and the success of that. One thing to note is that I've only been talking about websites during this video, and that's been deliberate. For mobile applications, understanding the acquisition channel is actually quite difficult and is a conversation to be had another time. The reason this doesn't work in the app world is because when you install an app, you have to go through the App Store, which isn't quite the same when it comes to websites. We have to talk about app install attribution, and that's not something that can happen out of the box for a lot of platforms. So I've done a whole deep dive video on app install attribution. If you want to learn a bit more around how it all works and the kind of systems and platforms you might need, then check out that video linked in the description. So now I'm going to pass you over to Dara. Dara's going to give us a bit of an overview of how this can be useful, why it's important, and the kind of value that we can get out from it. So over to you, Dara.
The user acquisition reports are going to be your go-to place if you want to better understand your upper funnel marketing activity. So this is to look at campaigns that are driving new users to your website who weren't previously familiar with your brand. The benefit of this is you can actually look at this data over the longer term to see which prospecting and brand awareness campaigns are actually driving the best quality users over a longer time period.
Cool, thanks, Dara. So as you can see, it's going to be really important for us to fully understand our marketing contribution and our marketing performance over time, not just from a traffic acquisition perspective, looking at the sessions, but from a user perspective and understanding whether or not our campaigns are driving long-term value. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.